Hey folks, hope you're doing well. It's the last day of class. Hooray. Sure that's what you're saying. If we're up to me, I continue teaching you through the holidays and then all next quarter. There's so much more to tell you. But as you can see, I'm returning to my home planet now that this is the last day of teaching. Anyway, okay, we got a lot to cover today. So let's go ahead and start with all the information about the exam and the finishing up of the course. So let me post that first, and then we will come back and answer questions. So this is information you all know, hopefully. Oops. Sorry. Okay. So as you know, the exam can be taken Monday through Thursday, and Monday you can take it if you want at 12:01 a.m. and take it all the way through midnight on Thursday night. It probably will be a 100-minute period I'll be giving you, although I might end up, I got to figure out how many questions are on the exam still. There was a lot of material. We went through a lot of material, which is good. You learned a lot. So if it is more questions than I had anticipated when I established that 100-minute period, I'll give you more time. I'll make sure you have enough time. Okay. It is open book. As you know, that doesn't mean that you'll be able to have time to look up every answer. But if there are some ones that you're maybe not sure of, you can certainly look up all your notes or the slides, or even go back to the video if you had time. But it's really important that you study before you take the test. Of course, you must take the test alone. I know that this isn't an issue for most of you. You've been given all these other resources. It should be fine, but it's very critical that you be taking the test alone and not with somebody else. It covers everything in lecture since the midterm. So, it was pretty clear where we divided the course. We talked about theories of perception up to the midterm, and then we talked about lots of other things since the midterm, and all those lots of other things will be what's on the exam from the lecture section. For the lecture. The discussion sections I've checked, and it looks like they are the sections that covered color, hearing, touch, smell, and taste. So your color, I believe your color perception discussion section was actually just before the midterm, but we did let you know then that that was material that was going to be covered on this second exam, not the midterm exam. So that will be covered. And then since the midterm, you've covered hearing, touch, smell, and taste in the sections. Make sure you go through that information. The review session will be tomorrow. Okay, so that's tomorrow, the 3rd. I've changed the time just a tiny bit. I've got to run an errand a little earlier than I thought. Actually, I have a meeting. The section or the review will be between 2 and 3:45, and you can use my link there. It's just my Zoom address, which I think is different from the one that I've been using for the course. So make sure that you use that one. And I will be there just sitting there at home waiting for you to contact me with questions. If somebody's asking a question while you link in, that's no problem. You can just listen as much as you want. I will be, kind of giving detailed answers, and I'll have the slides handy. I'm not going to re-lecture, certainly, but I'm happy to use the slides and explain things to you in some detail tomorrow between those times. Okay, let's take a break here and see what your questions are. Okay. Right. Oh, I got the date right for the review session. Rachel asked, the review session is tomorrow. And yeah, since I'm doing it, I will tell you it's tomorrow from 2 to 3:45, which is my home planet. It's that one right there. Oh no, I'm going to miss it. Thanks for asking, Rachel. All right. Around how many questions do you think test will have? Yeah, it's a good question because I was just communicating with the TAs this morning about the number of questions we have from section. We did a lot of material. It's going to be certainly some more than 60, probably closer to 65, maybe up to 70. I'm not going to overwhelm you, don't worry, and I'm certainly going to give you enough time. But you know, there will be more questions. The questions are a little bit more factual. They're not as theoretical as they were on the midterm, because we're not really discussing theories of perception as much, although there's something I want to mention about that later. But you know, it would be more straightforward to study for, I believe. Yeah, okay. Will there be a curve? You know, everyone did so well last time. It probably won't involve much of grade boosting. I mean, I think what the mean was ridiculously high last time, and I expect it to be really high again, because I've given you so many questions and I'm giving you open book tests. So yeah, I mean, you know, potentially there could be a curve if people don't do well on this, but boy, I'm expecting people to do very well. So there won't be much of a curve to help your grade. You just have to study hard like the rest of the class does. And, you know, you have a lot of the questions already, so it should be very straightforward. By the way, this, if you ever take another class from me, this isn't going to happen again. This is all reflecting the quarantine situation and the remote teaching and all that sort of stuff. So I'm not typically this easy a teacher. I don't tell everybody, oh, take a class with Rosenblum, he's the easiest teacher in the world. These are special circumstances. And I certainly understand what people are going through. Once we get back in the classroom, it will be more like regular college. Okay. All right. Any other questions about the exam? Anything else? Hopefully I'll see some of you tomorrow. I will record the review session. So if you can't make it tomorrow, you might want to look at that video of the review session before you take the test. You know, it's hard to know how busy it will be. Maybe the video will be just me sitting there kind of staring at the computer doing work until somebody comes on. But hey, at least you'll have a chance to see that. Okay, great. All right. Now, one other thing I wanted to do before we continue during our lecture, and that is just to go through the question we had last class at the very end. And what I'm going to do is just post the question for you. So don't worry about the statistics here. I just want to make sure you can see it. So in categorical perception, the answer we decided, well, let me just read through these again. Perception of say gradually turned to stay. Yeah, okay, so that's not correct. In categorical perception, to remind you, when we heard the shift from say to stay, it was very abrupt, right? It's not like we heard say slowly moving to stay along that continuum of acoustic change. It like, this is the whole point of categorical perception, even though it's the sound is changing a little bit at a time, perceptually, it seems that we don't hear that, you know, kind of very gradual change. Instead, all of a sudden we hear it kind of like abruptly move from say to stay, and then, you know, it doesn't change again perceptually after that, even though the sound is changing. And that's something that seems that it might be specific to speech. We'll talk about that later. Discriminations within a category were much easier than across. No, that's absolutely the opposite, right? So it was hard. Like, you know, when we heard all of these as say at first, we really couldn't discriminate those from each other very well. And the same thing when we heard all of them as stay. What we could discriminate well is when we went from say to stay. So that's across categories. That's where we were better at making those discrimination judgments. And then finally, perception of say changed abruptly to stay, and that is the correct answer. So the correct answer is C for this question. And I just want to remind you, just as a something you have to be aware of, is even though there will be answers that are both B and C or all the above, that doesn't mean it's correct. I know there's a tendency for professors to have that answer as the one that's correct, but it's important you read the questions carefully, because in this case, that's not correct. The correct answer is C. Okay, just wanted to go through that quickly. Let's go ahead and now go right back to our lecture, because we have a lot of fun stuff to talk about. And there's a lot of fun demonstrations. So where we were was discussing, the McGurk effect. And just to remind you what that's about, that is an audiovisual effect. And I know some of you have seen this online and in YouTube and there's lots of fun demonstrations about it. But the idea is that our brain seems to be sensitive to the multisensory aspects of speech, right? So even though you think of speech as something you hear, when we're looking at a face, we can't help but integrate what we see with what we hear. And so hopefully it worked with you. I know that the Zoom synchrony doesn't always work well, but again, I encourage you to look for this online if it didn't work well for you last time. Even though I told you to concentrate on what you were hearing, and subjects always tell us this, that they actually believe they hear something that's being influenced by what they see. That's certainly the way it's worked with me for 20, no, gosh, 30 years now that I've been working on. It's one of the things we study is the McGurk effect, and it absolutely works with me. I believe I have an experience that I'm hearing changes in the speech, even though the sound is the same in these demonstrations. What changes is what I'm seeing, and so what I'm seeing affects what I believe I'm hearing, and it's a very strong effect. You might not be surprised if you had the experience of hearing a change based on what your eyes were seeing, that when we are perceiving the McGurk effect, the visual information actually influences the part of our brain that we typically use for hearing. So there's some, kind of, I wouldn't say controversy. I think we're now understanding that the idea of a part of our brain is set aside for hearing, part for seeing, part for taste, all that sort of stuff. That kind of, modular idea is probably not completely correct. But we do think that there's a part of our brain that really is kind of doing most of the heavy lifting when it comes to hearing. In the case of the McGurk effect, it turns out that seeing a face articulate influences that part of our brain that typically is most involved in hearing, the auditory cortex, which is really interesting. And it's actually one of the first demonstrations that there can be, one sense influencing another sense brain area right away. It's a really interesting finding that's actually had a lot of influence on how we've kind of considered the perceptual brain. So hopefully most of you had the effect, and if you didn't, you've seen other versions of the effect. The question is, how universal is this effect? And the answer is very universal. Any language this has ever been studied with has shown some version of the effect. Now, that doesn't mean that somebody who doesn't have vas and das as critical phonemes in their language is going to show the McGurk effect with these specific syllables. But they will show the effect with some syllables that are in their language. And it's been tested probably, gosh, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 languages now. And for the most part, people do show the effect in one form or another, depending on the syllables that are used. The other thing we know about just Japanese and German were some of the first examples of demonstrations of how it worked outside of English, but I think it's generalized much more than that now. It's just dependent on which syllables are actually tested. But what else can we say about its universality? And one thing is a study we did a long time ago with a collaborator at the University of Toronto, is we were able to show that 5-month-old infants show the McGurk effect. And that's about as early as you can test infants using a McGurk effect type methodology, because what we use is something called gaze habituation. We talked a little bit about habituation last class with regard to pacifier sucking, and habituation is a way we can determine that an infant is getting bored and therefore is hearing a stimulus is the same. Even if we make some changes, they still perceive that stimulus as the same. And that's exactly the sort of thing we use to determine that the McGurk effect worked with infants. Although we didn't use pacifier sucking, we used what's called gaze habituation, which means we test how long an infant is looking at, in our case, at a video screen. How long do they look at the screen for? And if they're getting bored, we infer that they're perceiving the same stimulus over and over again. If they then reattend, we infer that they are seeing a new stimulus or perceiving a new stimulus. So without getting into detail, we presented an auditory va, visual va to them, okay, which is perceived as va by adults. over and over again until they got bored. And knowing they get bored is very easy with infants. They basically go like this. Okay, they can't pretend they're interested, which is pretty cute. But then what we did is we presented an auditory ba with a visual va. And as you can see here, adults typically almost always perceive that as a va. It's a very strong McGurk effect, right? So 98% of the time in our lab, we get, adults to say that an auditory ba and a visual va sounds like a va. It's a really strong effect. And so we thought we'd use that on infants. And so what we played, the second round was an auditory ba, visual va, over and over again. And we were interested to see if they got bored quickly this time because they just perceived a whole bunch of vas. And if they did get bored, we can now infer that they are still perceiving vas, even though the sound they're getting is ba. In other words, they have the McGurk effect. That's exactly what we found. We found that essentially they were very likely perceiving a video va plus an audio ba as a va, okay? Because they got bored after seeing a whole bunch of real vas right before. So there's a lot of different controls that one needs to do to test this, but we believe that we have pretty strong evidence that, yeah, infants that age do show the McGurk effect. And a lot of other people have now replicated that, used other sorts of syllables and used infants from different cultures and all that sort of stuff. So we think, yeah, it's probably a pretty solid case. The other couple of other kind of tidbits that I think you'll be interested in about the McGurk effect, that's going to have some bearing on things we'll be talking about in just a second. And that is this, that the McGurk effect seems to work even if you're not aware of looking at a face. Well, how can we do something like that? And what we've done is, this was years ago, before you were born, we did a study where we used a very odd type of stimulus. And you're familiar with this type of stimulus, right? These are point light stimuli. But in this case, these are point light faces. And what we did is, here, make yourself a naive subject just for a second. You come into a laboratory, you have no idea what the laboratory studies, and you see just this image, right like that. You have no idea that it's a perception laboratory. What might you say that image is? And well, you do know it's a psychology laboratory, so you might say, oh, this image must be one of those crazy Rorschach tests. And so I'm going to say, I don't know, it looks like my mom. No, something like that. What would subjects typically say is, it's a constellation of stars. It's, I don't know, what is it, kind of a butterfly made out of dots. People have no idea what it is. And then what we do is we show it to them moving. Oh, hello. Oh my gosh. Why is that not moving? Oh, okay, hold on a second. Nobody panic. That is absolutely supposed to be moving. Ah! Okay, sorry, hold on just a second. Oh my gosh. Hold on just a sec. Let's see if this works. I'm sorry. We had a little breakdown. Okay, good. I think I can do it now. All right. I'm going to share my screen again. Sorry, everybody. Okay. So now we show it moving. Okay. And you folks probably know what it is, right? Well, I just said it was a point light face, right? But people who didn't know what type of laboratory they were in didn't know what to say this was. I mean, some people said, it kind of looks like it's some sort of person moving or something. Some people said it was a face, but a lot of people continue to say things like, I don't know, it looks like that butterfly again, and now the butterfly's flapping kind of, or the stars in this constellation are kind of undulating or something. A lot of people didn't know what it was. And then what we did is we presented this face to them along with sounds. We said, okay, don't worry. We didn't tell them it was a face. We said, don't worry what the visual image is. Listen to the syllables you're going to hear and just tell us what syllables you hear. So I'll do this for you now. Here we go.
Ba, ba, ba,
And we presented tons of different stimuli like this to them and just had them write down what syllable it was. And if this worked on you, and it might not, it's a weaker effect, but as I'm looking at it right now, I absolutely get the effect. Let me show it to you again. Tell me, you can think about what syllable you're hearing.
ba,
Yeah.
ba, ba.
Okay. We showed it on a big screen. There was, it was the only thing they could really look at. They had headphones on. And a lot of people said that this was a va, even though, from the McGurk effect, it was an auditory ba. Now, I should tell you that I'm not surprised if it didn't work on many of you because of you may not be listening through good headphones, and it's a very small image, all that sort of thing. And it's not as big an effect. But a lot of our subjects did get the McGurk effect from this stimulus. We said, okay, now let's go back and see what they now think the image is. And most people said, okay, when I see this, and I hear syllables, it's a face. It's a weird face that has dots on it. But about a quarter to a third of our subjects still didn't know what it was. They still said, I'm hearing syllables, but I guess I'm still looking at that crazy butterfly thing, or I'm looking at a constellation of stars or splattered milk on a blackboard or something like that. And then what we did is we looked to see if those people who never recognized it as a face actually showed the McGurk effect. And they did, suggesting that those subjects who still weren't consciously aware of seeing a face in the stimuli still showed a visual influence of that articulation over what they were hearing, which really does kind of speak to the fact that your brain is kind of taking in all this information about speech from auditory means, visual means, and it doesn't even need to know that it's looking at a face to use that information from the face, right? It's kind of like remember those whistle speech things. Again, if the brain can get speech, even if it doesn't think it's getting speech from regular speech sounds, it's going to use it, right? And that's even the case if it's unaware of seeing a face. Very cool. So yes, your brain gets speech from sound most typically. It's probably the best way to get speech for most of us. It can get speech from faces now, right? Because of the McGurk effect shows that. There's one other place your brain can get speech from, and that's from touch. And that's called, we call that a Tadoma technique, right? So I can't remember if your TAs went through this in your discussion sections. And if they didn't, that's fine. I'll go through it quickly now. This is Helen Keller, who you may have heard of. She was born deaf and blind, and then did learn to speak and to perceive speech, and graduated from Harvard and wrote books about her experience and met all these dignitaries. There she is, touching the face of Mamie Eisenhower, who was the first lady at the time. Just a remarkable woman. And the way she was able to perceive speech was from touching faces, right? So, of course, if somebody knew sign language, that was better for her because she could actually hold the hands of somebody who was signing to her. But if they didn't know sign language, like maybe Eisenhower didn't know sign language, what she would do is touch the face of the speaker. She'd touch up here. She has a kind of interesting technique that a lot of other people who I've known don't use, but other deafblind people use the same general technique where they touch the face, they touch excuse me, the lips, the jaw, and the vocal fold, the voice box down here, the vibrations down here. And by feeling those things, she can understand a person's speech really pretty well, kind of as well as like if you're at a party and there's a lot of background noise, sometimes you have to ask people to repeat themselves. That's about her level. That was her level of speech perception through touch. And I've gotten to know a few other people who use the technique because they were born deaf and blind, and that's how good they are. They can basically, they can understand you for the most part, but they do have to ask you to repeat yourself every now and then. Cool. So this is something you could learn to do if you want to, right? You know, if you have 100 hours to practice this over your holiday break, you can learn to do this probably maybe not nearly as well as Helen Keller, but well enough that you could understand simple sentences. 100 hours of practice, that is. However, with no practice at all, you could come into a laboratory and be able to distinguish syllables. And if you want, you can, this is, by the way, the more usual, I'm just going to say, yeah, the more usual way people do Tadoma. Helen Keller had kind of an interesting twist on that, but for the first time ever trying, you could probably distinguish between ba and va and da if you were touching a person's face. If they were, you know, you had blindfold on, you had headphones on, they were, you know, they were speaking without, you know, any loudness, really very quiet speech, so you couldn't hear it or see it. You could probably distinguish those syllables. And what a laboratory did, not ours, another laboratory, is they set up a McGurk scenario, a McGurk effect, where it wasn't seeing and hearing speech, it was touching and hearing speech that was made discrepant. So people were touching a person articulating a va, while the subject at the same time was hearing a ba. And what you find is, again, you can get an influence out of one modality, in this case, touch, influencing what one believes they are hearing. In other words, you can get a McGurk effect through a sensory modality, touch, that you've never really used to perceive speech with before, which is so cool if you think about it. It's like your brain, your speech brain, just wants information about what a talker is doing as they articulate, and doesn't care that much if you get it from sound or sight or even touch, which you've probably not used before for perceiving speech, right? And so there's this very strong multisensory aspect of speech perception. And that it's actually that it's so strong, that multisensory aspect, that it's kind of helped us revise our understanding of the perceptual brain when it comes to multisensory perception. Anyway, let's make a couple of conclusions here about what we were asking. Yeah, modularity. All relevant information is available. I think speech is a tremendous example of that, because you're getting information not only from sound, not only from the hearing sense, but also the visual sense, the touch sense even. So very quickly, just to review, certainly speech is universal. We seem to have a predisposition for it, no question about that. There does seem to be some specialized anatomy for it, so that if one does have a stroke, if there's a brain injury in specific areas, Wernicke's or whatchamacallit, I can't believe I can't remember the areas here. Yeah, Broca's, right. Wernicke's and Broca's areas, one speech perception, one speech production, but they're considered to be very linked. The processes are mandatory, and remember, just to remind you here, that we were able to hear speech from signals that we knew were not speech. And in fact, it works for visual speech in that you're able to perceive visual speech from images that you're not even aware of. Our faces, right? What else can we say about this? The multi-sensory aspects or multimodal input seems very, very, very prominent here when it comes to speech. So yes, based on everything we've discussed here for modules like faces, it seems that speech is modular as well, right? Speech seems modular. It seems like it really does satisfy this criteria. Of course, the evolutionary importance or ecological relevance is also, very clear for this sort of thing. Cool. Let's take a little break here now. Do our practice question, and then we will conclude our discussion of modularity with some surprises. Okay, let's see quickly if there's questions on anything. I hear ba, why da on the last sound heard. Okay. Kelly, I think you're asking about the situation where sometimes what we end up hearing is a compromise between what's coming to our ears and what's coming to our eyes. And yeah, that's a very interesting example of that in some ways that, the information we're extracting out of the two modalities is kind of going to have to reach some sort of compromise in the brain. So it's something in between a ga and a ba, which, in terms of articulatory positions might be da. It's a very good question. Is it a person sitting bouncing a ball? Oh, you thought that, Daisy thought that that's what the point lights were. Cool. I'm glad you thought it was something different. It looks like those creepy talking hands from the Labyrinth. Is that, oh, the movie The Labyrinth? That's right. That's cool. Yeah, very cool. Daisy had that experience too, helping us. That's what they were. All right, very cool. It's a really nice image. I know that movie. All right, great. Let's do your polling question. And I think this one will be very, very easy for you. It's about the McGurk effect. And so you just had this on the previous slide. Which of the following is not true of the McGurk effect? A, it works with infants. Is that true or not? B, it works if one is aware that the audio and visual stimuli are discrepant. And I think I said that. Yes. Well, if I didn't, that's absolutely true. I've been studying this for a long time, and I'm absolutely aware that the audio and visual stimuli are discrepant, as you probably were too when we went through the demonstration after I told you what was going on. It still worked, right? C, it works only if one is aware that they are seeing a face. Is that true or not? D, it works in different languages. So which, importantly, read the question carefully, which is not true of the McGurk effect? Okay, I'm going to end questions a little early today because we have so much to cover. It's okay as long as you get the question. Okay, I'm going to end here, and most of you got this right. So which of the following is not true of the McGurk effect? Well, it does work with infants, so that can't be the answer, right? And what else? We know it works in different languages, so D isn't the answer. As I said, and I think I might have said this last time, I know that the stimuli are discrepant, that it's it's the auditory stimuli is one thing, the visual stimuli is something else, and it still works. So that's true of the McGurk effect. It still works. It works if one is aware, only if one is aware they're looking at a face. I just told you that's not correct, because we had subjects in our experiments, and other people have now replicated this, that subjects don't need to know that they're looking at a face in order for the McGurk effect to work, suggesting again that the brain wants visual speech or any type of speech information it can get, and it doesn't really even need to be conscious of seeing a face. So the incorrect statement is C, so that would be your correct answer on the test. Okay, great. All right, let's get back to our notes then, or our slides. And so I'm going to ask a question that is going to bear on everything we've talked about for the last couple of weeks. Because we've been talking about this big picture of modularity, right? So we talked about the evidence that speech, that faces might be perceived not only by a special component in the brain, possibly, but with specialized processes. In some ways, that's kind of the more important thing. If there's a component in the brain that is set aside for a type of stimuli, but it does processing, it does, its operations the same way as everything else, yeah, that's not that important. But if it really is using something special, that's interesting. It has many more implications for patients that have brain damage, that helps us understand the processing overall. So that's really it's in my mind, that's kind of maybe the more important question. Is the processing special? Is there something unique about how that class of stimuli is used? And what I've suggested so far with faces and speech perception is, yeah, for those two things, it seems that there's a specialization for faces, there's a specialization for speech, and those are two kind of excellent examples of modules that are, kind of set apart and have their own special processing that are doing their own things. What do we do then with this situation? What do we do, okay, with, oh, right. lip reading. So here's how we're going to ask: how special are faces in speech really? Because we're saying that these modules, these separate modules, are one of the things that we said is that they kind of are, they're kind of on their own. They're what we call encapsulated. Is that a term I've used before? I don't think so. And just what I mean by encapsulated is that all the little processes that go on in each of these modules, the speech module, here's the speech module, and the face module, are kind of protected, certainly protected from each other, and protected from other things in the brain. Right, that's what I mean by encapsulated. They're protected. They're not influenced by outside influences. Right. So what do you do with lip reading? Because we just talked about lip reading a little bit. We're going to talk about it more. But lip reading is a situation where you're getting speech information from faces. What's going on here? Which of the modules might be doing the processing involved in lip reading? Because now you have a sense that we all do some lip reading from the McGurk effect, right? We have another sense now, I think, also from COVID, that we use visual speech information. We use lip reading information more than we used to think we do, right? Which module then handles lip reading? Okay, so we're going to address that, and you're going to see. I'm going to have to convince you that this is important. I've taught this class in kind of an odd way. I've taught this class in a way where I didn't always give you just the basic facts of perception. I wanted to give you a sense of what perceptual psychologists do, and maybe more generally, what experimental psychologists do. How do they ask questions? How do they run experiments then to test the questions? I'm much more interested in conveying that than just conveying facts about perception. We've done that too to some degree, but I'm more interested in you understanding that this is what science is about. This is, we sometimes don't have definitive answers, and we have, a number of different types of answers, whether it's answers from an ecological perspective or connectionist perspective or computational, as we talked before, or answers about, the brain having kind of separate modules. It is the case that I haven't always given you a clear answer, and that's okay, because the clear answers, when the big questions, especially the clear answers, aren't always established. That's okay. We can still make a lot of progress science wise by kind of addressing the big questions and handling the little questions as we go along. That's part of the excitement of science, is kind of working towards answering those big questions. That's what I've been doing, and that's what we're doing now with modularity. Okay, because what we're going to do now is start discussing some evidence that's going to suggest that maybe this notion of modularity that we've been building up over the last few weeks isn't so cut and dry, isn't so clean. Okay, so here we go. Couple of things first, though. Let's just first establish we all lip read, and shoot, I had somewhere, I guess I left it home. This is something we are now very aware of, right? In the old days, I used to have to convince people. The old days, the pre-quarantine days, I used to have to convince people that we all do some lip reading to some degree when we're stuck in a noisy environment. But I think we now all have some sense that we are lip readers to some degree, because think about all the times now, whether you're at a restaurant, whether you're talking to somebody at a cash register, and you're having more trouble understanding them than you normally do. And yes, their speech might be a tiny bit more quiet because they have a mask on, but you might now know what really makes a difference is that it is much easier in a noisy environment. It is much easier to understand speech if you can see the face, the mouth of the person talking. And quarantine has made that more difficult. It certainly made it more difficult for individuals with hearing impairments, but I think it's made it a little bit more difficult for all of us. And I think a lot of us now are very aware that, yeah, I guess we're all doing a tiny bit of lip reading when it comes to noisy environments. It helps us understand what's being said. I'm not gonna use that demonstration today. I've got too much to talk about. What else did I want to say about this? Yeah, we use, as I said, we use visual speech, we use lip reading in noisy environments. We also, use it. We know from research, not in my lab, other labs, that when somebody has a heavy accent, this is an old time actor that's before your time, that was kind of known for having a very, very heavy Italian accent, but it was kind of part of his charm. You might realize yourself if you're talking to somebody with a heavy accent, especially if it's an accent that you're not necessarily very familiar with, it does help to look at their face. And it's not only an issue of helping you attend to what they're saying, but seeing their mouth moves does make it easier to understand them. That's been established. Complicated messages, even spoken by somebody who is speaking your native language and doesn't have an accent, if it's a message that's very technical, like the one you're getting from me right now, it helps you to see my mouth move. And again, it's not just an issue of being more attentive to the talker. It's an issue of seeing the speech information you're getting from the lower half of the face. Research has shown that, and now I think we know this from our own experience because of wearing masks through the pandemic. We know this from a number of other contexts. First of all, we do know that when you're learning a language, your first language when you were an infant, or a second language as a kid in elementary or junior high school, that seeing a speaker does help you learn that new language. So this is true as I said, for your first language and for your second and third languages, if you're lucky enough to have those. Seeing the face of the speaker does help you learn. Part of the reason we know this is because we do know that blind infants who are born blind but have great hearing, in fact, maybe have a little bit, when they're infants even, have a little bit better hearing than those of us that aren't blind, do take some time, do take a little bit longer to acquire certain aspects of language. Okay, they're not terribly delayed. They don't talk much later, or they don't, understand speech much later, but they do for some specific types of speech sounds. So blind children have trouble distinguishing speech sounds that are acoustically, that are auditorily very similar, but are visually very different. So for example, the speech sounds M and N are sound-wise kind of similar. Okay, if you were to look at the spectrograms, remember, of M and N, you see that they were pretty similar. But what is very clear is how different they look on the face. M, N, right? Here, let me make me bigger. So I'm going to be doing a lot of demos right now. So M, N, right? And so most of us those of us that can see and could see as infants could use the visual speech information as we watched our parents say moon and noon, right, to help us better hear that distinction. So the visual information we were getting from our parents' faces as we were infants allowed us to kind of attend to the sound differences that are very subtle. Blind infants can't use that visual information, obviously. And so it takes them a little bit longer to be able to make that distinction based on sound. And so blind infants are a little delayed for speech, but in very predictable ways based on the fact that they can't see the distinctions that might be harder to hear. Okay, so that's great evidence, I think, that we all use visual speech when we're learning our first language. And there's evidence to suggest that we do the same when we're learning our second and third languages. Cool. Now, you've already seen other demonstrations of visual speech already. The McGurk effect, you know that it works in many different contexts. It's a very strong effect. And we already know, oh, I'm not going to show you that again, that lip reading activates the auditory cortex. It's just redundant with what you've just seen. So yes, this is an important question, not just for the hearing impaired, but it's part of our own perceptual repertoire, even if we hear fine. Okay, and I think now, as I said, one of the few silver linings of the pandemic might be that we're kind of aware of this now. We know how important visual speech perception is for all of us, not just the hearing impaired. Okay, let's go back to the big question. What is the brain doing when it comes to, sorry about this, when it comes to lip reading? Okay, well, sorry, this is such a mess. The PowerPoint has changed, and it's messed up a lot of our video demonstrations, but I think I fixed pretty much what we have to fix. For the most part, historically, we had a sense that when it came to language, our left brain seems to be more active, right? You probably know that there does seem to be, for many language functions, for those of us that are right-handed, our left brain does seem to be more active. It seems to be more involved with language types of processing. Now, that's not completely clear-cut. We know that now, but let's just kind of go with it for a second. And we also, I'm not sure if you're seeing these alerts, but they're coming up all over my screen. We also had a sense that the right side of our brain was more specialized for faces, which is something we discussed when we were discussing face perception, right? That we look at the left side of the face to determine things like age and attractiveness and stuff like that, gender, right? So there does seem to be this separation, which makes sense from this kind of modular perspective, right? If there is a module for faces, it might be in the right hemisphere. If there's a module for language, it might be in the left hemisphere, that sort of thing. All right. But what of, oh my gosh, what of lip reading? Some of the early evidence suggested that lip reading was actually a function that was processed in the left side of our brain. So this came from some early evidence that was from lesion patients who were deaf and used lip reading pretty strongly because they were deaf, and then later on in life had a brain lesion because of a stroke. And we found that if that lesion was in their left hemisphere, if they might have trouble lip reading. If it was in their right hemisphere, they might have less trouble lip reading. So that's some early evidence suggested that. Okay, we'll leave it at that now, and we'll come back to it in a second. So at least from this slide, we can say, well, okay, so maybe the language module is going to be more responsible for lip reading than the face module, perhaps. But we can also say this, that there may be some separation in the brain for lip reading. And we typically think of there being a different set of information on faces that we use for lip reading versus face recognition, right? So when I ask you what you use for lip reading, you say, oh, I use the shape of the mouth, I use whether I can see the teeth, whether I see the tongue move. That's what I use for lip reading. And when I recognize Julia Roberts' face, I'm using the things we've learned about the features, yeah, which include the mouth, but I'm also using the eyes, I'm using the nose, I'm using the shape of the face, I'm using the kind of configural relationship between the features. I'm using that holistic information that we talked about before. So not only might there be a separation in the brain between what we use for lip reading and what we use for face recognition, there might be a separation in the information on the face we use for lip reading and for face recognition, okay, and all the details. Now, I see there's a lot of chat. Let me just make sure nothing's broken. Oh, everyone's asking really, really good questions. Okay, let me go back to those when we got a chance. I just wanted to make sure everything was working on the slides. Okay, this idea of a separation is now something I'm going to challenge. All right, here we go. It turns out that face recognition does have some bearing, does have some influence on how well we can lip read a face. All right. So if we, well, maybe some of this is intuitive, right? So actually, so I'm saying is recognizing a face influences lip reading is really the point here. Some of this is intuitive in that you might not be surprised if you're asked to lip read from the face. If you're, seeing your a family member's face, you might be able to do better because you've seen them more often. So now you might actually be able to lip read better from my face than you could have, even though lip reading is hard on its own. You might do better with my face because you've seen it in Zoom for 10 weeks. Maybe not surprisingly, okay? So it does help with lip reading sentences. But what I want to say is you don't even need to have tons of experience with the person in order to do better lip reading them. You can just practice lip reading from somebody for an hour and you're going to have trouble. I mean, I don't know if you can tell what this sentence is. We're not great lip readers. Those of us that are hearing individuals, we're not great at lip reading silent speech, right? We are great at integrating the information to help us hear speech better, but I don't know, can you do this one? Let's see. This person's saying one sentence over and over again. Okay, the sentence is potatoes grow in the ground. And maybe some of you got a couple of the words, a couple of the words, but maybe you're not great at it. That's fine. But after seeing this person for an hour saying different sentences, you'd be better with them than you would be with another person, even though your performance isn't great. Okay, so already you're saying, well, I'm recognizing this face. Maybe it's helping me understand what's being said. You're also, of course, experiencing their mouth more, so that could be part of it. All right. It also does this, though. This is interesting, if we were asked to lip read from a person single words and then told what the word was, right? So, it's a very hard thing to do, even if we're looking at a speaker who's fairly easy to lip read. So we're going to tell you what the words were afterwards. And then after, say, looking at a half hour of a person saying these words and being asked to memorize them, we are then shown these old words and some new words and asked whether or not the old words were part of, or asked whether we're seeing these words being presented to us, whether they were old or new. We would be better if the speaker was the same as the one we had saw in the beginning of the experiment. If we switch speakers between that dude and me, for example, between the beginning of the experiment, so you tried to memorize words from that guy you just saw, and then my face came up, ta-da, and I'm saying the same words and saying some new words, and your job is to say whether these are old words or new words. You'd be less good with my face after seeing his face than you would be if you saw his face again. Fine, that's maybe not surprising either. One other thing I wanted to say about face and recognizing the talker is this. It does have a bearing on the McGurk effect. So if you're familiar with the talker whose face you're looking at, it actually, for some reason, weakens the McGurk effect a tiny bit. It's unclear why that's the case. It might have something to do with the fact that you're also familiar with their voice. But what does seem to be the case in all of these points is that recognizing a speaker, going through the face recognition process, does influence how you lip read, suggesting that this kind of a kind of argued separation between face recognition and lip reading might not be as clear cut as we at first suggested. Okay. Here's some more evidence for that. Remember, we talked about this very kind of cool idiosyncratic effect about upright face information. Remember this? You're able to recognize faces better when they're upright. I mean, that's a disproportionate advantage of seeing faces upright, right? So you're able to use potentially this extra kind of holistic information. And not only did it help us recognize faces that are upright better, upright face information seemed to kind of allow us to notice weird distortions in a face, right? Remember this, the Thatcher effect, right? So it's really when we see an upright face that we're so aware of the distortions in the face image that, in fact, these features of the eyes and mouth have been turned right side up. I'm sorry, upside down in this case, and they're right side up in this case, right? So upright face information, when it comes to recognizing faces, when it comes to recognizing distortions in the facial image, no question that an upright face helps us, be more sensitive to those sorts of things using potentially holistic information, right? So it's absolutely true with face recognition. It turns out that it's also true of lip reading. Okay. Now, before you say that should be obvious, of course, you can lip read a face easier if it's upright versus inverted. I'm going to say this, that, yeah, that's absolutely true. That's what the data suggests. But more importantly, more kind of specifically than that, you can get the sort of Thatcher effect with lip reading that you got with face recognition. So it's, you know, it's not just that seeing an upright mouth is easier to lip read from. It's seeing an upright mouth in an upright context that helps. Here's what I mean. This is one of my favorite demonstrations. This is a very kind of odd demonstration, but I think you'll enjoy it. You're going to see faces, and it's a McGurk effect. So it's a visual va and an auditory ba. And this is the first one. Ba, ba, ba. That works for me. Did it work for you? Did most of you perceive va? I perceived va. It's an auditory ba, but it is visual va. Ba, ba. Yeah, works great. Ba. And, you know, in this one, like I said, most people, you know, if it's shown the right size and everything, get about 98%. And, you know, they're getting a pretty good McGurk effect here too. It does decrease a little bit when the face is inverted, which I'm about to show you, but not completely. Let's see if you get it. Ba. Oops, sorry. Ba. Yeah, I still get it, kinda. Ba. Ba. I have bad dreams like this. Ba. Okay. Ba. So just so you know, it did go down a little bit, the effect. With other syllable combinations, it went down a little bit more strongly. Now, I've got one here that I think I can't show you because it's broken. Let me try it one more time. Ba. Oh, shoot. Okay, what it shows, right, is an upside down face and an upright mouth. And what you find in that case with an upside down face and an upright mouth, you do get the McGurk effect, right? You do get the McGurk effect. But in the case where it's like a Thatcher stimulus, watch this now. So this is going to be an upright face and an inverted mouth. You've already seen an inverted mouth, and I think most of you still got the McGurk effect. But if you put that inverted mouth into an upright face, ba. Again, ba. Most people, ba, don't get the McGurk effect anymore. Ba. Okay, they lose it, right? They had it here. They were just looking at an inverted mouth here, and they got the effect. But when you put the inverted mouth in the context of an upright face, bah, most people lose it. And in fact, kind of interestingly, here, look what I have here. Oops, shoot. Hold on. Oh, hold on. No one panic. Yeah, here we go. What I have here is an inverted mouth on its own. And I think you're going to get the effect. Sorry. Ba. 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 I get it there, and I still don't get it here. It's the same thing. It's the same mouth, but it's in the context of an upright face. Ba. Ba. Sorry. Ba. So what it suggests is something really kind of weird and idiosyncratic, right? That it's not just seeing an inverted mouth that might kind of reduce the McGurk effect. It's seeing the inverted mouth in an upright face. And so we do consider all this holistic information as we're performing lip-read processes, right? So lip reading isn't just looking at the mouth on its own. It's looking at the mouth in the context of a face, and that face context, that upright face context, affects lip reading in the same way it affects face perception. Again, these functions of face perception and speech perception might not be as separate as we thought, right? Kind of undercutting, you know, what I've been saying. We're starting to worry a little bit about this kind of clear-cut modularity for faces and speech perception. What else? Now, remember, we just discussed the fact that we were using a different type of information for faces and visual speech perception for lip reading. The information for faces is the entire face, and the information and the configuration and all that sort of stuff, the holistic information. The information for lip reading is probably the mouth. We've already seen, that that's not completely true, because now we know for lip reading, we also do consider the holistic aspects of the face. But here's another type of information like this that I think you'll find interesting. Movement information seems very critical for both processes. So, we've been kind of portraying face information as if it's photographs of faces, but we do know that, in fact, seeing a face that is not recognizable on its own can be made recognizable by showing it move. And I didn't do this study. This is another study where you probably don't know this actress, but they were showing actors that could not be recognized from just a static image. But once their movement was shown, the movement of those images was shown, their characteristic movements gave away who they were. So we can be identified not just by the configure of the holistic information and the features, but how those features and configuration kind of moves. We have our own kind of movement signatures in our faces, probably in our bodies too, like we talked about before with point light bodies, that give us away, that convey who we are. That movement information can convey our identity. That's true of face recognition, and it's clearly true of lip reading. I don't think I need to convince you of that very much. You've seen these point light images with regard to the McGurk effect. Here's just some point light lip reading, kind of showing the same sort of thing. People can, to the degree they can lip read, will be able to lip read from these sorts of images very well. So movement information in both cases seems to be really useful, and you've seen the Mr. McGurk effect demonstration. Okay, let me move on a little bit more. Now, I think you're going to find this next thing really interesting, because as it turns out, you can identify who a person is from seeing their face speak on their own. So faces can be recognized from speech movements. And so this is an experiment we did some time ago, where what we did it in two different ways. The first way we did it was we basically did a point light technique, and we asked people to match faces that were seen talking, first fully illuminated like this, a regular video of a person talking silently, and then showed them 2 point light images, and in fact, they could do it. So is that person portrayed in this first point light image or this second point light image? Yeah, I'll do it one more time. Most people can do this. Saying the football game is over. And I should say they were filmed at different times. So their full face, their fully illuminated face, was filmed about 2 hours before their point light image was filmed. And they are saying the same sentence in both cases, but they're filmed at different times. And people can do this at better than chance levels. People can say, in fact, it was the first of those 2 point light images that you saw was the same person. So yeah, in a matching experiment, people can match a point light image to a talking face. It was that first point light image you saw, that was the same person as the talking face. But then we just asked people to come in and try to recognize their friends from point light images, and they can do this as well. So if you knew this person, who was an undergraduate here many years ago, you would recognize him, certainly recognize him that way, but you'd also be able to recognize him from just seeing that. Which is interesting, because you'd come in and you wouldn't have any idea what those images were until we told you what those images were, and say, okay, here's a list of 10 of your friends now, and you're going to see these and see if you can determine which friend is in this point light image. And people can do this. So you can recognize your friends from how their articulators move as they're speaking, which is pretty cool. Now let's talk a little bit about this, because I think this gets even kind of crazier in some ways. What you're doing when you're recognizing your friends from how their face speaks, how you're seeing their face speaks, is you're identifying them, I think, from their manner of speaking, from how they speak, how they articulate, how they string together their consonants and vowels. And we all do that a little differently, right? We do it based on our dialects, right? So I grew up in upstate New York, and I have a different dialect from you folks who grew up here in Southern California, and we all kind of sound different from somebody who grew up in Texas, right? We all have different manners of speaking. So that's a difference in dialect and region, but even within dialects, we have our own idiosyncratic manner of speaking, and that is called idiolect. That's our individual speaking style. And what I'm saying is that idiolectic information, our specific way we string together consonants and vowels, is specific to us, and it can be conveyed in visual speech, in the face movements during articulation, right? And it can be conveyed auditorily as well. It is a property of the way I articulate, my idiolect. I'm the one that articulates in specifically this way, and that is something that can be conveyed through sound and through sight in seeing and hearing the way I articulate. Okay, that's how I think people can recognize each other based on seeing just how they're articulating, which makes a really interesting prediction. Okay, since idiolectic information is available in both modalities, observers should be able to match speakers based on how they sound and how they look as they articulate. They should be able to match speakers across the sensory modalities. Now, whenever I talk about this, Mike Tyson gets angry, right? Because Mike Tyson is somebody who doesn't quite sound like he looks, right? He's got this very imposing look, especially now that he has the tattoos on his face, right? But he kind of talks like this. Don't tell him I said this. But he kind of has this kind of funny voice, right? It kind of doesn't match his look very well. And we can all think of examples like that, right? The other example I think of is Fran Drescher, who's this beautiful, stunning woman who has this really nasally voice, right? You know her. And probably you can think of other examples too, where you've heard somebody's voice on a podcast or something, and then finally see their face, and that's not how I thought they would look. And I think that we're aware of those sort of deviations. But I think when it comes to the manner in which we speak, right, seeing point light, something like that, that we're able to make those kind of matches. And that's exactly what the research suggests, is that, in fact, you can make matches across modalities. And so here you're going to have an example of the sound of somebody speaking, and then you're going to see 2 point light images, right? One of them is of the same talker, even though it's a different recording of that sentence. So again, the sentence is the football game is over. Your question is it the first point light talker who's the same person as the voice, or is it the second?
The football game is over.
Okay. Again, one more time. Is it the first person or second person?
The football game is over.
Is this person the same as the voice you just heard, or is the second person? Okay. And again, it's a different recording, right? It's not the exact same, so you shouldn't look for any kind of superficial details, but at better than chance levels, people can determine that it is in fact the first talker that's the same as the person you heard. So in a sense, what you can do, what your brain can do, is hear a face, right? Because it can make these matches, and it's probably based on this idiolectic information. We can get the kind of speaking style information out of the speech we're hearing that helps identify a person, and the speaking idiolectic style information out of the faces we see move, which is available in the point light images. Okay, one more crazy thing I wanted to tell you about, and then we'll kind of move on to a summary. And that is that the senses can share their experience based on learning to become familiar with a person's idiolectic style, their manner of speaking. Here's what I mean by that. We hear better from talkers that we have some experience with. That's not surprising. You can, understand the speech better on a distorted cell phone call if it's from somebody that who you're close with, your family members, your friends, your significant others, right? And that's not just because, they're likely to say something, that has a meaning that you might understand. It has to do with becoming familiar with the way they're talking. Research has shown that that's the case. It's also the case, which I mentioned before, that we lip read better. So if we have some experience, even if we don't do great lip reading from them, we do better with their face than from a new face, okay? And again, I think what might be occurring here is that the experience that we get from either lip reading somebody for a while or listening to their speech from a while is experience with their talking style. So we're learning somebody's talking style better, regardless of whether we're seeing their face or hearing their face speak, right? And what we've been able to show is this experience can be shared. And what I mean by that is the following. Let me tell you before I reveal it. We asked people to lip read somebody for an hour, and they're not great at this. The simple sentences like the potato grew in the ground, the football game is over, very simple sentences, and they get maybe 1 or 2 words right of each sentence at the most. Sometimes they're, not great, but we ask them to do their very best to do it for an hour. And then what we do is we turn off the video monitor and put headphones on them, and now ask them to listen to speech that has a background of noise like that, and ask them to try to identify as many words as they can. These are all new sentences. These are sentences they haven't heard, but one group of subjects gets the same speaker they just saw. Another group of subjects gets a new speaker. They listen to a new speaker from the one they just saw. They don't know that. Neither group knows this. All they're told is just to listen to the speech and try to identify as many possible words. And they're not told it's the same speaker or a different speaker or anything like that. But what we find is that if you lip read from a speaker for 1 hour, you are then able to understand the speech you hear from them better. Okay, that's just showing this here. You lip read from an hour, then you either hear the same talker or a different talker. You do better if you've actually listening to the speech of the person you lip read. And it works the opposite way too, right? And what it suggests is that what your brain cares about is articulation and a person's articulatory style, their idiolect, right? The brain cares about articulation. It doesn't care about sensory modality. More than that, it suggests that this division between face perception and recognizing a speaker, who they are, and lip reading is not as separate as we've kind of portrayed them to be. This distinction between face recognition and speech perception is not as distinct, right, as we thought they were. All right, well, okay, let's kind of now, so actually this is just a summary slide. I'm going to go through this fast. You'll have this available to you. Oh, shoot. Let me turn off the sound. Recognizing a face influences lip reading. Both processes use similar upright face information. Both processes use similar movement information. Faces can be recognized from speech movements. Conclusion, lip reading and face recognition do not seem to be separate. There seem to be overlapping information and, as it turns out, overlapping involvement of regions of the brain when we do this. Okay, so we're starting to now consider what might be going on with modularity. Well, you said, okay, so maybe that's not going to be important for modularity, but what about this idea of prosopagnosia, right? That was kind of good evidence for modularity, wasn't it? Wasn't that the idea that you could injure a part of your brain and not recognize faces anymore? And the truth is, the story of prosopagnosia is more complicated than the press typically makes it out to be. Because here's what we know. People who have prosopagnosia, who have a brain injury related deficit in recognizing faces, actually show an unconscious ability to recognize faces. Some of that comes from studies using GSR. What is GSR? That's measuring galvanic skin response. Remember that sweat on the skin? And so you ask people to look at a series of faces, some of which you believe they would know and some they wouldn't, but they're prosopagnostics. So what they'll say is, I don't know what that face is. I don't know who that face is. I don't know. Even though you know they should probably know a lot of these people. They're family members, they're actors they see in movies and TV and that sort of thing. And there's some that they really don't know. There's strangers. And again, throughout the entire discussion, they say, I don't know who that is. But in fact, if you study their sweat, what you find is that it increases when, say, a name matches a face. So, shoot, I can't see what's on the slide here. Yeah, if it's Julia Roberts versus, oh yeah, yeah, if that's Julia Roberts, for example, if the name comes up there, they will show an increase of galvanic spread, and it will just generally increase with familiar faces. That's maybe the more obvious thing. That even though they have no, I guess, response suggesting they recognize the face, I don't know, I'm sorry, I don't know who that is, they will sweat more when a familiar face is presented to them. I'm not going to get into a lot of detail here. I don't have it. It also works not just with skin responses, but how quickly they scan an image. They will scan an image faster with familiar faces. If they're asked to match across ages, and don't worry about this. I'm not going to test you on these sorts of specifics, but you don't need to use galvanic skin response measures to show that on some level a prosopagnosia is recognizing a face. Okay, don't worry about that. Yeah, don't. It's too much detail. Too much detail. It's not going to be on your test. But what it suggests is that prosopagnosics do probably have a face recognition process at some level. What they don't seem to be able to do is be consciously aware of that recognition. Right? So there is some recognition going down. They scan familiar faces faster. They say names of people faster, if in fact it's presented along with a face of that person. The galvanic skin response as well. It's just they don't have conscious recognition. So even something as seemingly strong evidence for modularity is questioned when you find that prosopagnosia, isn't so straightforward. Okay, what else do I want to say? Yeah, what about functional specialization? Just very quickly, as it turns out, inversion effects do work with other types of expertise. Okay, dog experts, for example, breeders that work with the same type of dog for 10 years will show inversion effects. Okay, in the same way, they'll show inversion effects. They'll show Margaret Thatcher doggy effects, all that sort of stuff. Okay, don't worry about the details. Even in experiments where people are taught over the course of a few days to recognize a class of objects in a very detailed manner, these greebles will also show the same sorts of inversion effects and other types of effects as well. Don't worry about the details on this slide. You won't be testing on them, but the idea is that expertise seems to be able to induce modular sort of effects. Okay. Same thing with speech. Categorical perception has been shown with different sorts of instrument sounds for musicians. The McGurk effect seems to work not just with faces and speech, but also with plucks and bows, as it turns out, again with musicians. So here's what I want to conclude, that the ecological relevance may not be all that necessary to show these functional distinctions. Okay, I know I'm running out of time here. So it can be something that can be trained. So for example, with greebles. Anatomical distinctiveness, well, that's now questionable, right? We're not quite sure that prosopagnosia is this really very straightforward evidence. It seems to be a much more complicated sort of deficit, right? What else? Conscious awareness, well, that can be trainable too. The same with cognitive impenetrability. Expertise, okay? So, all relevant information might be available. Expertise might be the thing that is special, not faces, and speech. So I'm questioning modularity here. Let me finish off very quickly by doing one more polling question, just so you have it on your test. I don't want to deprive you of this. What influences lip reading? Which of the following factors has been shown to influence lip reading? A, inversion of the face. B, applying the Margaret Thatcher manipulation to the face. C, familiarity with the speaker. Or D, all of the above. And I'm just going to give you the answer really quickly here. The correct answer for this one is D, all of the above, all of those things. Inversion has a weaker effect on the McGurk effect, but it does affect lip reading. The Thatcher effect does affect lip reading and the McGurk effect, and having familiarity with the speaker. The correct answer for this question is D, all of the above. Okay, good luck. Maybe on your test, maybe I'll see some of you folks tomorrow. All right. Good luck on all your finals and have a nice holiday.
Wait,